I'd like to welcome you to our Cyber and Digital Technology Forum today. I'm Anna Christie, I'm the Chief Executive of the Sussex Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber has run successful sector-based forums, which are well established. And this is a fairly new forum. We did run these forums for a couple of years, right up until April last year, and then we had to focus on a few other priorities. So we're going to re-establish the Cyber and Digital Technology Forum. It's now more essential given the use of digital technology, especially the last few months with a lot of businesses and people working from home, and also particularly the increase in cybercrime. So we are joined today by two experts. We're joined by Robert Morgan, who's the founder of Factory Internet. Rob has worked in computing for nearly 20 years. During that time, he's worked with national, pan-European and global network providers, secure capabilities that act as the foundation of the modern cloud. He works to help keep banks, telecom providers, government departments and small businesses secure. We're also joined by Martin Bannister, who is the Managing Director of Kogo. And he has been in the IT sector for over 30 years and founded Kogo over 22 years ago. He's on the Executive Council for CompTIA and Board of the Sussex Chamber of Commerce. He has a passion for cybersecurity and has held many seminars around this and GDPR. So we will start off and transfer over to Rob.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Great to be here and great to hopefully be giving you some new insight into stuff that hopefully helps you during COVID. So basically, I'm just going to run through a couple of areas, largely around the challenges of working from home, working remotely, as a lot of us know right now is a bit of a change, and not a change we all went into. It was a change forced on us by a pandemic, so that puts us in a slightly different situation. And then I'm going to go through some practical guidance of why security is more challenging at the moment, and then obviously go through some things that you could use to solve that, improve that, and work forward. And then look at, okay, it's great, thanks for some technology solutions, but how could we formalize that? How could we move forward into a scenario where I can actually see that we've done that correctly? So I suppose the one aspect of working remotely during COVID that's perhaps, it's certainly obvious, but it's not brought up in work so much, is the personal aspect. There's a lot going on at the moment, and obviously, schedules are challenged. So while people are working remotely, we're finding a mix of customers, suppliers, and our own personnel have all got several other things to do. So we've got people that are single parents, we've got people that have got people to care for or look after, so their times are challenged. So working a traditional 9 to 5 is much harder than normal. And what we're finding is the boundary between working and personal time is actually quite crossed over. So the traditional come to the office or come to work at this time, leave at this time, and there's a very good segment between work and personal time is quite broken up. So we're finding people with that flexibility where we can give it, it's helped them dramatically in terms of getting used to how we're working at the moment and how business is at this time. Also, I think we're quite lucky today. Everyone's video seems to be working well and the audio seems okay. But poor Wi-Fi and connectivity, obviously being used to being in an office, you've normally got business grade internet connectivity, you've got high quality Wi-Fi systems and all the rest of it. When you go home, you have a network with lots of kids perhaps playing games on it, you have other people watching live TV, streaming stuff, watching Netflix. So you're just one of several users in the house. The proximity of your devices to the Wi-Fi access point, so if you're working in a townhouse and you're on the 3rd floor up and the Wi-Fi point's on the ground floor, you might have a much worse experience up there than you will otherwise downstairs. The other thing we're finding is checking in with people, so employees and staff, and just actually having time to have a conversation and make sure people are okay, and that their well-being is being checked on, and that people are comfortable and they don't have any problems. The other, and this is kind of something that used to be a big thing in the early 2000s, but I think is certainly becoming bigger again is the home working assessment. So if people are working from home for longer periods of time, do they have adequate desks? Do they have adequate chairs? RSI risk, that stuff's not gone away. Do they have an adequate screen? Any other tools or utilities they need? It's something that should start to be, if this carries on for much longer than it is, almost formally done rather than left. And then the other thing we're finding hugely beneficial are tools like Teams, so part of Microsoft Office 365, Zoom, which we're using now, and another utility called Slack, which allows you to instant message people. And what we're finding with these tools is you can't replace that face-to-face time, but what you can do is actually set up meetings just for people to chat, not just about work, because we all know, we want to be productive when we're in the office, but the reality is there is times where people are just chatting. How did your weekend go? Did you see this thing at the weekend? Did you do that thing? And that, at worst, all it does is boost morale. At best, you sometimes get ideas and sparks and other things that come off that. So trying to bring that into a virtual world is quite useful. We've certainly found it helps. And then the other obvious is we are in the midst of a global pandemic, so people might be a bit more worried about other things as well other than work. So I think the thing we're finding is the least, if you can take some stress and anxiety away from people during this time, it'll be a good thing, and the results will be noticeable. And that can be helped through the use of just basic human interaction, using digital tools and checking in on people. So moving into the world of security and where that comes into this, what we're finding in the data and systems we look at, and we currently look across some major global telecom platforms, so we see quite a lot of stuff, and we essentially see attackers making a big move to home users. So it was always a thing. People would always attack people on their own networks and at home rather than just offices. But a lot of attacks centered around the fact that once you compromise one user or device in an office, it would spread to others. So what we're actually finding is people are changing tact and going for remote users. And one of the ways people are doing that is looking at where someone might have a bad attachment or a bad email attachment, or they'd visit a website and be a bit unsure of it. In an office environment, they would be quite used to being able to ask someone who was more technology aware about, is this a good thing or a bad thing to do? Should I check this? And going back to the thing of, having things like Teams and Slack, having those forms of communication immediately open help people and the human users, ultimately go, is this a good or a bad thing? So the attackers are definitely shifting their attention that way. Going to the start of the slide, obviously home networks are quite untrusted. So like you have coffee shops and you have airports and you have Wi-Fi there and users using them, you don't necessarily know who's listening to the traffic on that. So obviously we talk about encryption and HTTPS and looking for the little green padlock in the corner in a web browser. The one thing we don't often talk about is something called DNS, and domain name servers are the bit that basically turn, if you request, say, bbc.co.uk or google.com, it's the piece of technology that turns that from that name that and you're aware of to an IP address that the computer networks and the internet networks understand. And that particular lookup is not encrypted. So if someone is interested on a network and listens to what's on that network, they'll get a list of all DNS lookups. So they won't necessarily get a list of what website you went to, but or what web page on the website you went to, but they will be able to see that someone went to a certain website at some point. And obviously, most companies have various systems that aren't public, let's say, that you would only allow staff to get to. Someone listening to that traffic could then see the location of those systems and then start to attack them. So that's a problem we see quite commonly. Obviously, you've also got your own customer data, and that's now being accessed and processed in an environment that's at someone's house rather than in your normal office. So some of the physical controls you put around that are no longer valid. And then also there is the fact that you can have an acceptable use policy or an IT security policy for users and say, well, actually, here's what you can and can't do with a work device. So if you have a work laptop, don't use it for personal reasons for the following things because it's subject to more attacks. So going to that point on the malware and viruses and policy, we had a user in the not so distant past who had a piece of malware that recorded keystrokes, so everything typed on the work machine, and that was based on them using the device for a personal reason. And then that malware was on the machine and the keystrokes were logged. So it is certainly dangerous. So moving to the next slide, just to give you an idea of two attack types that we see often. The left attack, the brute force attack, is, I would say, an older method of attack. It's still used, but basically someone looks at your username, which might be your email address, and then keeps guessing passwords. And they'll either guess passwords they know about you or passwords you've used before, or they'll use a dictionary of lots of common passwords and try and crack your password. What we're seeing now is more attacks of the credential stuffing nature, which is on the right-hand side. And what happens here is when you use the same password on lots and lots of different websites, you use the same email address, same password, and we find that once one of those websites is compromised, i.e., you hear this a lot, a particular provider or company has had its user database stolen, that user database might contain your username and password. If you use the same username and password on multiple sites, the credential stuffing attack is exactly that. So an attacker will basically take one of those databases and try and log into lots of common services and see what they can get from there. So in terms of how we can try and protect against that, there's a few different ways to protect against these kind of problems. The first, the top left, is central user and device access management. So imagine in the morning you come in, you log in on your Windows machine and it lets you in, and then you can get into all your business services as normal. If the login for that Windows machine is centralized into a directory or Office 365 or something else, that gives you the ability to then disable that access for that machine. So if that machine's lost, stolen, or compromised, you could actually turn the access off. The second piece is password management. So there are utilities and tools out there that will allow you to store all your passwords in a password management database or safe. And these tools basically also come with password generators. So basically you can have different passwords for every single site. You don't need to remember all of those passwords. You can literally copy and paste them as you log into something. Some of these tools are built into the browsers like Chrome and Firefox and Internet Explorer, so it automatically generates a password for a new site and saves it in your vault. Hugely beneficial against protecting against a credential stuffing style of attack. And then user education, of course, at the bottom left there. So how we educate users about understanding, what sites are good to visit, what sites are not good to visit, and what looks suspicious, what doesn't. If it does look suspicious, what should you do? Who should you alert? How should you contact people? All that kind of stuff. The top right, we have multi-factor authentication. And the big benefit of this one is essentially what happens, you try and log into a system like Google Email, Office 365, and rather than just letting you in because you've put the right password in, it then sends you another challenge to your mobile phone and says, please either enter this code or please click approve to continue to log in. So even if an attacker had your username and password, they'd still struggle to log in. Obviously, going back to the IT security policy and acceptable usage policy, which ties into the whole picture and the user education piece, if you've got that written down, people can start to understand what they're responsible for as part of their day-to-day job and what they can do. And then finally, at the bottom right, it's a bit older now, but I mean, people might have heard of virtual private networks and VPN. And obviously with the cloud and things being in a browser, people aren't so bothered about VPNs. But the point I talked about earlier on home networks being untrusted and, DNS lookups, so where it's converting addresses like BBC back to an IP address, all that data will leak on a home network. If you have an always-on VPN, then you can basically push the DNS traffic over that VPN, and the traffic's secured, and at least only your own IT team can see that. And then obviously a small diagram here just to how home working looks, because you've essentially got a laptop down the bottom with a home Wi-Fi network, and that's plugging into your office network. It's plugging into a mixture of cloud services, so you might have Dropbox, Office 365, a bunch of other cloud services. You might have Facebook if you're doing Facebook adverts, all this kind of stuff. And that one user's going across all that, and that one device is going across all that. So the idea of having sort of centralized authorization where you can turn around and say, if this device or user is doing something we don't want to happen, we can actually just stop them from one place. That's hugely powerful, and that can really reduce risk. So looking at how you could formalize this and go, well, actually, I'd like to move forward from just a bunch of technical recommendations to something I can have a certificate for, and know that we've done the right stuff. There is a framework out there called Cyber Essentials. It's quite a good standard. There are various standards out there, but for a small and medium business, I think this one works very well at the moment. It's quite pragmatic, so you can actually get it to a point of implementing it. If you have cyber insurance for, if you have ransomware attacks or other things, or you lose business because of a cyber attack, having this standard will help with insurance. It is actually required when working with certain UK government departments. And obviously, the amount of damage that can occur in an attack, this will help decrease it, because you look at segregating systems and access to systems out over different users and different devices and whatnot. Essentially, there's 5 basic baseline controls and areas of focus. And the first is firewalls and networking. So just making sure your network is set up correctly, securely, and in a good manner. The second is devices and software. So think laptops, mobile phones, anything that's got access to corporate data, really, and the software around that. So Windows, Apple iOS, Android, all that kind of stuff. The third area is user access control. So going to that central access piece where users can access various parts of the system. Let's say someone in accounts or someone in sales might use the same system for various pieces. Should they both have the same access and full access, or should they have different levels of access? All that kind of stuff comes in there. And then malware protection. So, okay, if we accept that the world users are going to get malware occasionally because they're going to click on bad links, they're going to get an email that's malicious and it's going to slip through the net, they're going to open that. So how when that malware gets to a machine, do we protect it? How do we best protect it, and how do we stop it doing anything too dangerous? And then the final is patch management. So software and hardware vendors are constantly releasing updates for their systems, and most of those updates contain security improvements, and a lot of attackers rely on the fact that people don't update stuff. So just by patching and being up to date, you can stop a decent amount of attacks straight away. And then things I think you can do today. So things we could take away right now that you could help with and would help secure your business straight away. Obviously, your online accounts, anything that you log into, Office 365, we talked about Dropbox. You could use Google services. Any of these services that you're using the same password across multiple websites, if you can go and change those passwords and use a password manager, so you've got different passwords for these services, and put multi-factor authentication at least on email and a couple of other key services, maybe social media accounts and stuff like that, maybe anything like Office 365, it will hugely improve your security position right off the bat. Finally, patching your devices. It sounds obvious, but if Windows and other things are bugging you for updates, go and do them. It will make things harder for an attacker. And then finally, education for users. So, investing in training and making sure people are suspicious. If they have communications or things they're not expecting, a particular user normally sends them an Excel sheet once a month, but starts sending them PDFs twice a day, asking them to check it really quickly. Is that normal use? And having the users in that mindset of perhaps they should report that, and then having someone they can report that to sanity check it and just make sure it is or isn't malicious. And that's kind of it from me. So thanks for everyone's time, and if there's any questions, more than happy to answer them. I'll hand back over.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you for that. We'll hand over to Martin and have his presentation, and then we'll take all of the questions at the end.
Right. So what I want to talk about is the company's responsibilities around data. Now, one of the biggest challenges that most companies have is that they just don't understand where all their data lives. You've got your corporate file server, you maybe have people with USB drives, you might have a website with an e-commerce platform on it, obviously email, cloud storage now, everyone's using Teams a lot more, and Dropbox, particularly with home working and even paperwork. You know, this is all data. From a GDPR point of view, you still need to understand exactly where all that lives. And then there's also, you know, what kind of data have you got? Where, you know, where is it? What kind, you know, is it sensitive? Is it personal data? Where's your proprietary information, intellectual property, all that sort of stuff. And depending on what data, what classification of the data is, you may need to think about the level of security to protect it, permissions, who has access, whether you are going to allow that to go outside of your organization at all. So it's really, really important for businesses to understand where that data is and what it is. If we think about from a GDPR point of view, these are the statement from GDPR point of view about what data, what you should do with the data. And it's quite clear that, you know, it needs to be accurate, up to date, not kept for any longer than it needs to be. There's been 160,000 data breaches reported to the ICO since GDPR came in, and over 120 million in fines as of January 2020. So, you know, it is really, really important for businesses to understand their GDPR responsibilities and to make sure that data is protected. And there's no excuse for not knowing that the data was sat on a particular server or on a particular platform, or users were allowing users to have that in their own personal Dropbox or their own personal OneDrive. So really, really key. So if you think about all of the different places that data could live, you know, you've got your computer system, whether that's your own desktops and laptops, but also your servers. You know, you need to create a list of all the data and have a look at the permissions that have access to it. Make sure that that's backed up and you've got a good disaster recovery process in place and that it's tested. You know, if you're using portable devices, USB drives, you know, what data's being stored on those. Have you decided as a company that you're going to allow portable storage to be used? If you haven't, then you're not really setting a standard out for anybody. You've got any websites? Some companies have multiple websites. Some of them are e-commerce sites. Sometimes the website is actually their core part of their business, and without that website, their business stops. So it's really important to understand that. Email, on-premise or cloud. I'm going to be talking a lot more about cloud today because there is more of a risk with cloud platforms because it's accessible. It's easy for people to know where to go to log in, whereas your internal email system, you needed to know the address before. So one of the things we find is that people don't actually go through and remove old users and mailboxes, and they certainly don't look at the permissions that people have or audit what people are doing on that platform. In cloud storage, we've seen everyone jump on Teams, even without planning it, and now we've got data all over the place. SharePoint, OneDrive. You know, are you allowing anyone to use personal storage, cloud storage, to store information? Do you have a policy which says that you are allowed to use cloud storage platforms or not? So let's have a chat about the common attacks. There's 3 common attacks I want to talk about today that I've seen a lot of this year. The first one's ransomware. It's been around for a while. What we're seeing now is that criminals are exploiting remote desktop services. And a lot of people use terminal server now, particularly with lockdown, for staff to remote in and access corporate systems. But what we have found is that most of those, if they're not actually secured properly, they're under attack all day. Robert mentioned password attacks. If you've got an open terminal server and check the event log, you'll see loads and loads of attempted logins, and eventually the criminal will get in. It may well be a basic password. We had one client that had a password for reception that was reception, and of course that got straight in. The malware encrypts all of the data on the server. It also now goes onto other machines, so it goes across the network, and you may well end up with multiple machines that are encrypted, and the criminal wants a ransom for it. So the only way getting back from that is obviously to recover from backups if you've got backups, and bear in mind that if this is going across your network and your backups are also stored on your network and not secured, then the backups may be unusable. We're seeing that sometimes data is stolen, and we're also seeing that when people pay the ransom, they go on a list of people that will pay ransoms. So then you're going to be more of a target for criminals. The other thing about the point about data being stolen from a GDPR point of view is that you've now lost some data, and potentially you'll need to report that to the ICO. Could be quite damaging. Criminals could also then exploit the data. With the data they've got there, they could exploit to see whether they can actually try and monetize over and above the ransomware. The second one is credential harvesting. So we've seen a lot of this going on where someone will receive a OneDrive link saying, can you quote on this particular job? And they click through to it, eventually gets to a page which purports to be a legitimate log-on page for Office 365, for example. And then the user will enter their credentials unaware that the site's fake. And then within minutes, the criminal's got access to the mailbox. They may well send emails out, they may well not. They may well just set up forwards and monitor the mailbox. And what they'd be looking for is to see an opportunity for jumping inside an email chain and saying, can you pay this invoice or this payment into a different bank? So we've seen quite a lot of that. But the credential harvesting is the first part of the attack. Obviously, the second part, then the criminal's then going to try and get payment. We've seen some invoices that have been paid to the wrong company. Unfortunately, the invoice would then need to be paid again because it was unpaid. We've seen emails go out requesting someone SMS them, really basic stuff. And again, this use the training and making sure people are aware that these things are going on is absolutely critical. Most of these breaches, these types of breaches, with a bit of user training can be avoided. They could also be avoided with putting some controls around the systems as well to make sure that emails can't go out and get forwarded and so forth. So what can you do? If you think about the computer system, checking the permissions and making sure only the correct users have access to the data, removing any logins for people that have left. We often find that there's a multitude of admin logins and old users that haven't been removed. So making sure users don't have admin rights, making sure the data is backed up off site with version history so that you can go back to a particular point in time. Make sure that these terminal servers aren't exposed to the internet. Now, if you do need to use terminal server, there's ways of securing that with a certificate or VPN. But it's not just remote desktop that's the risk here. It's any systems that are exposed. There could be a camera system. It could be anything. Just making sure that nothing's exposed that doesn't need to be. Making sure applications can't be downloaded from the internet and installed. Most of the ransomware that gets deployed is an application. The script will run, download apps. If you can't download them or install them, then that's going to prevent that. And also making sure websites are screened as well, so that if it's a known compromised website, the end user can't get there. Portable storage, if you decide as a company we don't want anyone to use portable storage, you can use tools like BitLocker to go to encrypt any data that's going to be put on storage, or you can actually block it saying people can't. One of the pitfalls with portable storage is that data can be put onto it and taken out of the organization. So that's something you don't want to do. And the websites as well. Quite a lot of the major breaches that have happened have been compromised websites because people haven't kept them up to date. You can use a proxy service like Cloudflare to protect the website from attacks. So it's there. On email, we've talked about multi-factor. I think that's got to be a mandatory for most businesses now. I can't understand why a business wouldn't want to implement that, because we've seen so many attacks that could have been avoided if multi-factor was enabled across the organization. You can also disable forwards of emails outside of your organisation. So if a criminal does get in and tries to set up a forward, that'll be blocked. You can lock down cloud email from unknown devices and locations. There's lots of features within Office 365 to do that. I obviously mentioned mailboxes and logins that aren't in use, permissions, email security products to help protect against phishing and malware. And the most important one is this cyber awareness training for staff. You know, if the end user knows that looks suspicious, they'll question themselves. And if you get the awareness training right, then they'll even question legitimate emails, thinking, okay, well, I just want to be sure. You know, if they get an email requesting a bank change, just to know that actually, you know what, we should be checking that. If there's an email saying I want you to do a payment to somebody, and it's, you know, it's not the normal thing, even if it's from your managing director or CEO, just ring up and say, just checking to make sure this is legit. And cloud storage as well, you know, if you decide as an organization you don't want people using Teams, SharePoint or OneDrive, or you do want them using it, you could disable it from use. You need to make sure that all that data is backed up. So what we're now seeing is people are using Teams and putting data in that. Microsoft does have some backup and recovery features, but it's not as granular as you might want. So there's some products out there that you can use to back up that, so that you can go back, you know, many, many months. Cloud security products, again, you could put a compromised document in that platform which other people could potentially access. So having a cloud security platform which scans that to make sure that everything in it is safe, that's also good practice. And if you are going to use a cloud storage platform, make sure staff know how to use it. And if you don't want them using anything else, you can disable it, or just have in policy to say that you shouldn't be using any personal cloud storage platforms for company data. So if you want some help, we've got a 365 security audit where we will go through and run a baseline of your Office 365 system and go through a best practice guide to make sure you're restricted, you know, you're securing your platform. And we'll also advise on the backup and cloud security for your Office 365 if you need it. So that's all from me.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Martin. Going back to what Rob was talking about, poor Wi-Fi, and I know a lot of businesses experience poor Wi-Fi, and I know it also impacted a lot of young people because they obviously weren't able to go into to college or to school, and with everybody else at home, there was lots of issues with poor Wi-Fi, as well as you know, the stress of working at home. What is it that people could do to improve? Is there anything that can be done to improve the Wi-Fi? Because I know that that could be an issue if we're looking at a second lockdown and businesses having to carry on working from home. Do you know what could be done to improve connectivity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first is if someone's on a wired connection to a sort of BT line, understanding if they go on Google and type a thing called BT cabinet checker and put their phone number in there, it'll give them the actual options without any other connectivity provider in the way of how fast BT can get a circuit to your house. And that's normally an important consideration. So whether fibre to the cabinet's available or whether you're stuck on ADSL. And what that'll do is quickly give you an idea of the maximum speed you can go. And for stuff like Zoom meetings and whatnot, if there's only one user online and you're using it, 10 megasecond download, 3 or 4 megasecond upload will be okay. If you've got lots of users on the system at the same time, mainly lots of users streaming and doing stuff like that, it'll keep incrementally using more bandwidth. The one thing we find more often than not, our guys do audits on this, and we find that the connectivity to the house or the office is actually not so bad, but we find once you're in, there's very poor Wi-Fi. So traditionally, things like BT and Sky, the routers they give are not great for Wi-Fi. So either using Wi-Fi extenders to get to different areas of the house, or using a better quality of Wi-Fi system. BT have some. There is a system called Ubiquiti Unify. Lots of these systems that can basically get Wi-Fi around more of a location in your house will help. Obviously, if the speed's really slow and there's no way of getting a faster speed in, there are 4G and 5G internet plans with unlimited data use available now, and they might be better if someone's can't get fibre to the cabinet. So.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know that you talked about cyber essentials. We have cyber essentials ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's really important for businesses that are looking at government contracts or public sector contracts. So if they're looking at working with public authorities, the councils, schools, or anything like that, where they have to submit a tender, the cyber essentials is now a requirement, isn't it? Yeah,
it's becoming more mandatory. And the other good thing with cyber essentials is it keeps you quite honest. So if a company like Factory or we went in and looked at a company, we would do a gap analysis initially. So we'd say, okay, here's the bar for cyber essentials, and we'll check all these systems and see where you are and go, well, you're around here, and then we'll work out a plan to bridge the gap, and then we'll get you audited and get you to the right standard. But a lot of the points Martin was talking around, GDPR and those privacy things and security things, by getting to cyber essentials as a standard, it helps prevent against a lot of those attack vectors. So it's really, really useful, not just from you're certified and you can bid on tenders, but it's also quite practical as well. So it's a really good standard to achieve and work to. And just picking up what you were saying about GDPR coming to Martin, I think it's because of the lockdown, it happened very, very suddenly, and there was a rush to get everybody working from home, for businesses that could work from home, that is. But it's that consideration about paperwork and what you can have at home, because I think a lot of people still have that paperwork, and how they destroying that and what they're doing with that paperwork, because it's not just the data that we may have on our computers or laptops, it is other bits of paper with personal details on there.
It's everything. If they're just putting that paperwork straight in their bin, then that's a risk. It needs to be destroyed properly. What we found with with the home working bit, that no one really planned for this type of event. We had people taking desktops under their arms home, and then getting home realizing there's no wire to where they wanted to work. You talked about poor Wi-Fi. We had to deal with all of those. Printing was another one. And then they used the adoption of Teams and these types of tools. There was no planning around it. It was just free fall for any user to go in and create a team and do what they want and put data wherever they want. And I think as we start to come out of lockdown, companies are going to start to think about, okay, well, how could we have done this better? How could we have structured it better? There was capacity issues in people's offices as well, where there wasn't enough VPN connections on the firewall for everyone to work from home, not enough bandwidth. So it wasn't just the home end, it was also the work end as well. Not enough terminal server licenses, lots of that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's going to be really important as we come back out of lockdown for businesses to sort of really think about how they could make this transition, if it happens again, a lot smoother and be a lot more prepared. We're seeing a lot of businesses as well that have decided, you know what, it's home working, it's all right, we're getting all the work done. I don't think we'll have everyone back into the office all the time. We're going to do a little bit of both. Some people have even said, I'm getting rid of my office. So it's been a scary couple of months from a security point of view, but it's been a good exercise to prove that actually home working is a viable option for businesses. But it needs to be prepared and planned properly. And I agree.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it will give businesses an opportunity now to put something substantial in place, because if we ever have to have that situation where we have to lock down again, there is another emergency and we have to do the same, we've got those processes now in place, and hopefully all the right processes, the policies and the procedures and what businesses need to do. As you said, it was just a mad rush, and people may not have had the right licenses or the processes and literally just picked up their computers. That's what a lot of my staff had to do. We don't all have laptops. So it's making sure now that we reflect on that and make sure we do have the right processes in place going forward. I can see there's a question from Eddie. So cyber essentials is really just basic housekeeping. Should companies not strive for a higher standard?
I mean, I could cover some of that. Absolutely. Cyber essentials is a very good starting point, but going beyond that, depending on what a company does, if they're in insurance, if they're in a financial market, if they're in a critical service, so they're delivering, they're in food wholesale, they're in transport, logistics, security, hospitals, all that kind of stuff. There are other standards you can go to. So the first basic would be ISO 27001, where you've got a sort of ISMS system, and that's slightly more formal. Though a lot of it is, while there are technical approaches to it, there's a lot of it around the policy side. To go to a higher security standard, I'd probably recommend the CAF framework, so Cyber Assessment Framework, which is part of the UK's CNI, so Critical National Infrastructure, and that one's written by the NCSC. And that again is a very high standard. We've implemented that with some telecom customers, national and global providers who provide services to government offices like the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and they work to that standard. So there are obviously standards you can start with, and Cyber Essentials is a great starting point, but yeah, you could absolutely go beyond that if you wish to.
Brilliant. I think that's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you very much, Martin. There's been some really useful advice there for, some takeaway points in terms of what you were saying about the security and safety, like the password management. I think that is something that we probably all use the same password, or we keep our password somewhere that may not be secure. So that is something that definitely need to make sure we're managing that. Also, how we're handling our data, whether it's paperwork, and making sure that that is destroyed in a secure way. And if people are working from home, that they can come to the office and secure that, bring that data so that it can be destroyed securely. And the cyber awareness training as well is really important to make sure that all staff, criminals are always looking at different ways of attacking and accessing data. And it has become more apparent now, especially in the last few months, that there has been more cybercrime. So I didn't know whether you wanted to both leave with some parting words before we bring this session to a close.
Sure. I'd just say thanks for attending, everyone. And the stuff we've covered today, I would say, is a good start. You can obviously go way beyond it, and every organisation's unique. You've all got unique challenges depending on what industry you're in, and what your security needs are, depending on how much stuff you've got on premise, how much stuff you've got in the cloud, how much stuff you've got stored with users or in offices, and really, if you need to be in a scenario where you need to really understand and control this, then do get specialist help to help with that, and that will help drive you forward from a cyber perspective, because the attack vectors aren't getting worse. There are more of them. The threats keep coming. Everyone's in the IT space is trying to fight and move forward with that. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Yeah, the paper I've created is a top 10 tips for Office 365. I recommend everyone goes through those and see whether they can actually implement all 10. And then your Office 365 environment is going to be a lot safer. There is a lot more cyber activity going on at the moment, particularly with home workers, and just want to make sure that everyone stays safe.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining our session today.